Because the mistress lost her baby, my husband imprisoned me for 2 years. He visited monthly, but I never met him. The day I walked free was also the day he lost it all. After 6 years of hell behind bars, I finally walked out, expecting to breathe free. But tell me, how do you find freedom when the man who betrayed you, the man who personally sent you to that living nightmare, is still pulling all the strings? What happened next still gives me chills. The heavy iron gate groaned open, a sound like a death rattle, and the biting New York winter wind immediately clawed at me, tearing through my threadbare coat. 6 years. It had ripped me apart, turning a vibrant woman in her 20s into a hollow shell, a ghost. I tried to take a deep breath, but there was no sense of freedom, no relief. My chest was just heavy, filled with the stale, desolate smell of prison walls. The person waiting for me wasn't Michael, my husband, the man who'd once promised me the world before personally throwing me into this hell. Instead, it was David, his most trusted assistant. He saw me, quickly extinguished his cigarette, and hurried over. His face always wore this look of pained sympathy, you know? He reached for my tattered duffel bag, then hesitated, pulling his hand back as if I was toxic. "Miss Catherine," he stammered, lowering his head, "Mr. Caldwell had an unexpected board meeting. He asked me to take you to your new home." I didn't answer. Didn't even bother to sneer at the age-old excuse. I just gave a silent nod and slipped into the back seat of the gleaming black luxury car. The interior was warm, reeking of expensive cologne, a smell so foreign, so Michael, it made my stomach churn. Throughout the drive, David kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes a weird mix of pity and morbid curiosity. I just stared out the window. New York City had changed so much. Skyscrapers clawed at the sky, concrete monsters, and the streets were choked with traffic. Everything felt glossy alien. It made me feel like an outcast, a forgotten relic. The car pulled up to a high-end condo overlooking Central Park, prime real estate, obviously. David quickly opened my door, leading me through a magnificent lobby. I kept my head down, desperate to shrink into my oversized, outdated clothes, to avoid the scrutinizing gazes of the doormen and residents. When the door to the 25th floor penthouse swung open, it was like stepping into another world. Vast, opulent, filled with luxurious furniture and state-of-the-art everything. Imported leather, a massive curved screen TV. David set my bag down, pulled a thick envelope and gleaming keys from his jacket. He placed them on the glass coffee table, his voice faltering. "This is a black card with no spending limit and the keys to the apartment. Mr. Caldwell said this is a small gesture to make amends. He feels the sentence was a bit harsh, looking back. He wants you to have a comfortable life now that you're out." I stared at those keys, glinting on the glass, reflecting the light from the crystal chandelier. They stung my eyes. Make amends? Was he trying to buy a clear conscience? Or was this penthouse just another way to silence a woman fresh out of prison? I picked up the keys, the cold metal seeping into my bony palm. I didn't scream. I didn't throw them in his face like a wrongly accused wife might. I just lifted my head, my deep, lifeless eyes meeting his. David flinched, taking a step back. It was the gaze of an animal wounded beyond repair, no longer angry, just dead. My chapped lips parted, and I uttered each word slowly, my voice raspy but clear. "Go back and tell Michael this for me. Catherine died in prison. A dead woman doesn't need a penthouse." David's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but his throat seemed to clench, strangling the words. I didn't wait for his reaction. I quietly picked up my ragged duffel bag, turned, and walked out the door, leaving him standing there, utterly bewildered. As the elevator doors closed, I saw him still frozen in the middle of that opulent apartment. I walked to the edge of the Hudson River. The water was gray and choppy in the winter wind, small waves lapping against the stone embankment. The cold wind whipped at me, but I didn't feel it anymore. My heart had frozen over a long, long time ago. I opened my hand, looked at the keys and the black card one last time, then flung them with all my might into the dark, churning water. They made a small splash, then vanished. Just like my life. Just like my hope. All of it swallowed by the depths. I turned and walked away, disappearing into the hurried crowds, a nameless phantom in this glittering city. I learned later that at the exact moment I threw those keys into the frigid river, Michael was sitting in his executive office, on the top floor of his prestigious real estate empire, waiting for a call. He sat in his powerful leather chair, a half-smoked cigarette between his fingers, his eyes fixed on the phone. In his arrogant mind, he probably believed I would call. either to thank him profusely for his expensive gift or to scream curses, to vent 6 years of pent-up rage. Either reaction would prove I still had feelings, that I was still human, and most importantly, that I was still under his control. But his waiting was met only with a chilling silence. The phone remained as lifeless as a brick. Then the office door burst open. David walked in, his face drained of all color, beads of cold sweat on his forehead despite the warm office. Michael frowned, stubbed out his cigarette, his deep voice resonating with authority. "Where is she? Did she take the keys? Why hasn't she called me?" David swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he relayed my exact words, not daring to omit a single one. "She didn't accept them. She told me to tell you that Catherine died in prison. A dead woman doesn't need a house." Michael froze. The pen in his hand stopped midair. A flash of disbelief, then pure fury, crossed his handsome face. He shot up from his chair, the cigarette falling and scorching a patch of the expensive carpet, unnoticed. "She dared to say that? Then where did she go?" he roared, the sheer volume making David jump. David stared at the floor, mumbling, "She threw everything into the Hudson River and left. I couldn't keep up with her. She vanished as if into thin air." Michael slammed his fist on the desk, the sound echoing through the vast room. He couldn't believe it. The woman who had once loved him enough to sacrifice her youth, who had knelt and begged him to believe her, could now be so cold, so final. His pride, the pride of a successful man, was deeply wounded. He immediately ordered his men to find me. But I was like a grain of sand lost in a vast ocean, leaving no trace behind. My disappearance became a sharp thorn in Michael's side, planting a seed of unease, a vague anxiety he couldn't name. He started to have his people investigate what had truly happened to me during my last 2 years in prison. The period when his visitation rights had been revoked, and he had completely lost contact with me. A few days later, a thick medical file was placed on his desk. The dry, clinical words inside were like knives twisting in his soul. Michael's hands trembled as he turned each page. He had always thought my suicide attempt 2 years prior was a sign of weakness, a desperate ploy to win his pity. But the raw truth laid bare in that file was 100,000 times more brutal than anything he could have imagined. I hadn't wanted to die over a broken heart. I had been cornered and beaten by a gang of inmates in the showers. They not only brutalized me, but also stole the only memento I had of my grandmother, a small antique locket I cherished more than my life. In that moment of utter despair, cornered and robbed of my last shred of hope, I had snapped. I lunged at them, biting and clawing like a feral animal. I sank my teeth into the ringleader's ear, tearing off a bloody piece of flesh. The horrific brawl landed me in solitary confinement for a month. No light, no human contact, only suffocating darkness and loneliness. It was during that hellish period that my spirit completely shattered. I descended into a severe depression, developed PTSD, and gradually lost the ability to speak. Michael dropped the file. He collapsed into his chair, his eyes staring blankly into space. For the first time in 6 years, a cold fear crept into every cell of his body. He realized that the wife he had always considered weak and submissive had truly died on that fateful night. What had returned was merely an empty vessel carrying psychological wounds that could never be healed. And the one who had caused all of it was none other than himself, the man who had mercilessly thrown me into a lion's den because he had believed the lies of his mistress. Michael clutched his head in the vast, cold, luxurious office. His ragged breath sounded like a lament for a love he had destroyed with his own hands. 6 months passed since I had thrown the keys into the river. My life was like a dry leaf, swept by the wind into the darkest corners of the city. I didn't dare use my real name or take any job that required an ID, always haunted by the fear that Michael would find me. I lived in a damp, squalid room in a tenement building, collecting cans and bottles during the day and taking odd cleaning jobs at construction sites or office buildings at night. Anything to earn enough for a pack of instant noodles to get through the day. Today, I'd been hired to clean a newly constructed office building, still in its raw phase. The developer was scheduled for an inspection, so the foreman was pushing us to scrub the main lobby spotless. I pulled on a pair of oversized, paint-splattered coveralls and a beanie that covered half of my gaunt face and my hair, which I'd chopped short like a man's. Holding a high-pressure water hose, I kept my head down, meticulously blasting away every speck of dried mud from the concrete floor. The loud hum of the pump helped drown out the gnawing hunger in my stomach. As I worked, the sharp rhythmic sound of leather shoes striking the floor grew closer, accompanied by the murmurs of a crowd. I instinctively shuffled to the side, my head still lowered, planning to wait for them to pass. But a pair of polished dress shoes stopped directly in front of my water hose, blocking my path. I glanced up. My eyes met perfectly creased, expensive trousers that radiated a kind of power and wealth. People like me could only ever observe that from a great distance. "Hey you! Get out of the way for the boss," the site manager yelled. But before I could move, a deep, familiar voice that made my heart stop said, "Wait." The man took a step forward and bent down, trying to see the dirt-streaked face hidden under my beanie. I panicked. My whole body trembled. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet felt cemented to the wet floor. It was Michael. He was still handsome, still the elegant, arrogant CEO. But the look in his eyes as he stared at me was one of utter shock and disbelief. "Katie, is that you?" he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood, trying to hold back the sob rising in my throat. I shook my head frantically, trying to back away, but Michael was faster. He lunged forward and grabbed my wrist, so thin it was just skin and bone. His hand was warm, but to me, it felt like a red-hot iron clamp, bringing back painful memories of being restrained, of being interrogated in prison. "You've hidden yourself well," Michael cried out, his voice lost in the whistling wind of the construction site. "Look at you. Do you even look human anymore? Why did it come to this?" His touch, his breath, it was all a spark to the powder keg of emotions I had suppressed for so long. Utter terror morphed into the frenzied resistance of a cornered animal. I didn't say a word, didn't explain or beg. I tried to yank my arm away, but his grip was too strong. In a blind panic, I aimed the high-pressure hose in my hand directly at him. Whoosh! A powerful jet of frigid water slammed into his expensive suit, his handsome face, his entire arrogant demeanor. The crowd gasped in horror. A few security guards started to rush me, but Michael raised a hand to stop them. He stood his ground, taking the full force of the relentless blast, getting soaked from head to toe. He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot, never flinching, as if he wanted to use this physical pain to atone for the guilt tearing him apart. I stared back, my fingers still clamped on the trigger, but my tears were now mixing with the dirty water on my face, salty and bitter. Michael didn't seem to care about his drenched state. He slicked his wet hair back, revealing a resolute forehead, now etched with lines of exhaustion. He signaled to the stunned guards, his voice regaining its cold command. But his gaze on me remained heavy with an indescribable sorrow. "Get her in the car. Take her back to the office." I struggled, tried to scream for help, but what was the strength of a frail woman against two massive bodyguards? They dragged me away like a sack of trash and pushed me into the waiting luxury car. Inside the confined space, the smell of leather mixed with the musty odor of my clothes created a bizarre scent that made me shrink further into the corner of the seat. Back at the CEO's office, Michael didn't change his wet clothes. He tossed me a clean towel and sat in the chair opposite me, water still dripping from his suit onto the polished floor. He didn't seem to notice. He studied me with a look of helplessness, then pushed a thick file across the desk toward me. I glanced at the cover, Proposal for the East Hampton Ecological Resort Project, accompanied by a map of a familiar coastal area. My heart pounded. That was the community cemetery in my hometown, the place where my grandmother was buried. I looked up at Michael, my eyes filled with alarm and fear. Michael slowly opened the file and pointed to a red dot on the map. His voice was low, but each word was a nail hammered into my soul. "This is your grandmother's grave, isn't it? This plot of land is right in the center of the resort's development plan. According to the zoning permits, the entire cemetery has to be relocated." I trembled, my hands clutching the ragged hem of my shirt. My grandmother was my only family, my reason for living, my entire world. I was in prison when she died, unable to even attend her funeral. It was the greatest pain of my life. And now even her final resting place was to be disturbed. I stared at Michael, my voice raw with anguish. "What do you want? What do you want from me?" Michael leaned back in his chair, his eyes turning sharp and calculating. The compassionate look from before had vanished, replaced by the shrewdness of a seasoned businessman. "I know you hate me. You won't take my money. But what about your grandmother? If you don't agree, I'll follow standard procedure. We'll have the remains moved to an unmarked mass cremation facility. You'll never be able to find her ashes." I was frozen. A mass cremation. My grandmother, who had toiled her entire life, would suffer such an anonymous, lonely end. Michael knew my weakest point. He knew I could endure any humiliation, any beating, but I couldn't bear for my grandmother's peace to be disturbed. He was cruel. So cruel it sent a chill down my spine. He pushed another paper toward me. It was an employment contract. Sign this. Work for me for 5 years as an archival clerk. Consider it you paying off your old debts and medical bills with your labor. In return, I'll ensure your grandmother's grave remains untouched. I'll even have it properly maintained and landscaped. After 5 years, the contract is up. You can go wherever you want. I won't stop you. I picked up the pen, my hand shaking violently. 5 years. Not as long as the 6 I'd spent in prison, but it was a new kind of spiritual confinement. I looked at Michael, the man I had once loved with all my heart, now so foreign and terrifying. But the image of my grandmother's simple, grass-covered grave filled my mind, urging me to submit. I clenched my jaw and signed my name. It felt as if I had just sold my soul to the devil for a second time, not for money, but for the peaceful rest of the dead. Michael took the contract, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. But I saw a flicker of suppressed pain in his eyes. Good, he said. Starting tomorrow, you'll move into my villa. Don't overthink it. It's just more convenient for work. Michael's villa was an isolated estate on a small hill, shrouded by dense ancient trees, exuding a somber, chilling atmosphere. David drove me there at dusk as the blood-red sunset was being swallowed by the night. The heavy iron gates opened, and I stepped into the vast, but empty grounds, feeling as though I were entering a more luxurious prison, one without bars, but that caged a person with loneliness. Michael had already hired an elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Davis, and a private doctor to be on call. He seemed to think that material comfort, and being waited on hand and foot, could somehow compensate for my years of hunger and misery in prison. Mrs. Davis looked at me with pity as she led me to the largest bedroom on the second floor. It had a soft king-sized bed with white silk sheets, intricately embroidered curtains, and a balcony overlooking a flower garden. You get some rest, dear. Just call if you need anything, she said before quietly closing the door, leaving me alone in the opulent but alien space. I stood in the middle of the room, looking at the pristine white bed, and goosebumps broke out on my skin. It was too soft, too clean. So clean it reminded me of the fake comfort rooms in prison, set up to deceive inspection committees while we slept packed together on the cold, filthy concrete floor. This comfort was a trap. I was afraid that if I lay down, I would sink into a sleep from which I would never wake, or wake to find myself strapped to an operating table, my organs being harvested one by one. Night fell, enveloping the villa in darkness. The silence was so profound that the chirping of crickets outside sounded deafening. I didn't dare turn off the lights, leaving the room glaringly bright. I didn't dare climb onto the bed. Instead, I pulled a thin blanket onto the hard wooden floor in the corner nearest the door. Only here, with my back pressed against the unyielding surface, did I feel a fragile sense of security. It was a feeling reminiscent of my nights huddled in the solitary confinement cell, a place whose memory was seared into my soul. I curled up like a shrimp, my arms wrapped tightly around my head, trying to lull myself to sleep. But as soon as I closed my eyes, the horrific nightmares returned. I saw the inmates surrounding me, saw the blood, saw my grandmother's locket being smashed to pieces. I screamed, but no one heard. I saw Michael watching me coldly before turning his back and walking away. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. I scrambled up, pressing myself into the corner of the wall, muttering nonsensical words as tears streamed down my face. Outside, on his own balcony, Michael stood silently, the ember of his cigarette glowing in the darkness. He was staring at a tablet displaying the feed from the security camera in my room. He saw me sleeping on the floor, saw me twitching and thrashing in my sleep, saw me sobbing and begging an invisible tormentor for mercy. A sharp pain seized his heart. For the first time in his life, this powerful man who could command storms felt fear. He was afraid of my brokenness, afraid of the ghost of the past that he had helped create, now gnawing away at what little life I had left. He wanted to run to me, to hold me, to apologize, but his feet felt like they were cast in lead. He knew his presence right now would only send me into a deeper panic. The next morning, David drove me to the corporate headquarters to start my new job. I wore the office uniform Michael had prepared, a white blouse and a black skirt, but on my emaciated frame, it hung like clothes on a scarecrow. As I entered the grand lobby, I felt dozens of eyes on me. Whispers erupted like a disturbed beehive. I heard the new archivist used to be a janitor. The CEO just brought her in out of nowhere. Probably some old flame he decided to rescue. A woman with heavy makeup whispered to her colleague, just loud enough for me to hear. Look at her. She looks like an addict. What does the boss see in her? Or maybe she's got some dirt on him, another sneered. I kept my head down, pretending not to hear, and followed David into the elevator. I was assigned to the records department, a room in the basement that few people visited, thick with the smell of old paper. My job was to sort and organize documents from decades past, a monotonous and isolating task, exactly what Michael intended, to keep me from interacting with too many people. I worked like a machine, never speaking, never making eye contact. If anyone asked me a question, I would only nod or shake my head. Soon, everyone in the company started calling me the mute. I didn't care. My world was now silence. Michael had told the department head not to give me any strenuous tasks, but I didn't want that. I threw myself into the heaviest work. Whenever a new shipment of document boxes arrived, instead of waiting for the mail staff, I would haul the heavy cartons myself. I gritted my teeth, the veins bulging on my thin arms, sweat soaking my blouse. With every strained muscle, with every jolt of pain in my spine, I felt a strange satisfaction. Physical pain helped me forget the emotional agony tearing me apart. It helped me feel that I was still alive, even if it was just the wretched existence of a worm. One day, Michael made a surprise visit and found me struggling to carry a box twice my size. He stormed over in a fury, snatched the box from my hands, and slammed it on the floor. "What do you think you're doing?" he yelled, his face red with anger. "Did I hire you to be a manual laborer? Why won't you listen to me?" I stood there panting, sweat plastering my hair to my forehead. I looked up at him, my expression strangely calm, without fear or resentment. I pulled a small notepad from my pocket, scribbled a few words, and held it out to him. "I am a debtor. A debtor must work to repay her debt. Don't pity me. Your pity makes me sick." Michael took the note, his hand trembling. He glared at me, his eyes burning as if he wanted to devour me whole, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. He understood. I was using my own cruelty to punish both him and myself. He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy and tormented, leaving me alone in the cold warehouse. I bent down, picked up the box, and continued my silent, plodding work. The days in the basement archive passed in suffocating silence. I thought I could remain an invisible ghost, hidden among dusty shelves, safe from the glittering, cruel world above. But that fragile peace didn't last. One rainy afternoon, the archive door swung open, and the sharp, arrogant click of high heels echoed on the concrete floor. The visitor was Jessica, Michael's fiancée. I'd seen her in magazines, the beautiful, elegant, powerful daughter of a prominent politician. Jessica wore a form-fitting designer dress and had a fur wrap draped over her shoulders. Her strong perfume overwhelmed the musty scent of old paper. She stood there, radiant as a swan among a flock of ugly ducklings, her sharp eyes scanning the shabby room before landing on me. I was sitting on the floor, sorting files, my hands stained with ink. I glanced up at her, then immediately looked back down at my work, treating her as if she weren't there. My indifference seemed to enrage her. She strode closer, her heels clicking like tiny hammers against my eardrums. She stood over me, her shadow casting me in darkness. Her voice was sweet, but laced with scorn. "I heard Michael hired a special new employee. So it's you. Long time no see, Catherine. You look terrible." I remained silent, my hands continuing to methodically stack papers. I had learned a hard lesson in prison. Silence is the best shield. When you don't react, the bully gets bored. But Jessica was not like the prison thugs. She was more venomous, more arrogant. Seeing my lack of response, she smirked. Holding a steaming cup of coffee, she pretended to stumble. "Oops," she cried theatrically as the hot, dark liquid spilled all over my thin arm, seeping into the old, raised scars. The burn was sharp, like salt being rubbed into a wound. I flinched and pulled my arm back, but I didn't make a sound. I looked up at her, my eyes empty and vacant. Jessica dabbed at her hand with a napkin, her voice dripping with contempt. "Oh, I am so sorry. The floor is so dirty. I must have slipped. But I'm sure skin that tough won't blister, right? A convict's skin is thicker than a rhino's hide after all." Without a word, I stood up and retrieved an old rag from the corner. I knelt and slowly wiped the coffee from the floor, my rag brushing against the toe of her expensive shoe when she didn't move. My submissiveness, so absolute it was a form of defiance, stunned her. She had expected tears, anger, a retort, but I treated her like she was nothing, a meaningless speck of dust. My silence became the sharpest weapon, a greater insult to her pride than any curse. Furious, Jessica stomped her foot, spun around, and stormed out, leaving me alone with the angry red burn on my arm that was already starting to swell. The next day at lunch, while everyone else headed to the cafeteria, I stayed behind as usual to eat the dry sandwich I had brought. But today, Michael appeared at the archive door, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the cramped space. His eyes flickered to the red mark on my arm, and he frowned slightly, but asked no questions. He just said curtly, "Come to the cafeteria. I won't have people saying I mistreat my employees." I was about to refuse, but his determined expression told me I had no choice. I followed him silently, keeping as much distance as I could. The company cafeteria was loud and bustling, and the thick smell of food made my stomach clench. Michael chose a table in a secluded corner. He got me a tray laden with meat, fish, and most notably, a steaming bowl of rich beef stew. "Eat," Michael said, pushing the tray toward me. His tone was a command, but there was a hint of expectation in it. "You're too thin. You need to get your strength back." I looked at the greasy stew, the chunks of meat swimming in the thick, oily broth. The heavy smell of beef hit me, awakening the most horrific memories from prison. Memories I had tried to bury deep. I had once been forced by my cellmates to eat leftover slop mixed with dish soap and filth from the toilets. They called it stew, and made me swallow every last bite or face a savage beating. That rancid, sour smell haunted my nightmares, and my body had developed a visceral rejection of rich, oily foods. I covered my mouth as a wave of nausea rose in my throat. My face turned pale, and a cold sweat broke out. I shook my head violently, pushing the tray away. Seeing this, Michael's face darkened. He thought I was being difficult, intentionally defying his gesture of kindness. He slammed his hand on the table. "Eat it now. Are you trying to starve yourself to death just to spite me? I won't allow it." His shout made everyone turn and stare. I panicked, my hands and feet trembling. Michael picked up a spoon, scooped up a piece of meat and broth, and pushed it toward my mouth, trying to force me to open it. The smell of the meat right under my nose was the final straw. I couldn't hold it back any longer. I violently slapped his hand away and began to vomit uncontrollably. Right there at the table. The acidic bile from my stomach spewed onto the floor, onto Michael's clothes. I heaved until I was empty, my body convulsing in pain. Michael was frozen, the spoon clattering to the floor. David rushed over and whispered something in his ear about the eating disorder the doctor had warned him about. Michael's expression shifted from anger to horror, then to profound regret. He reached out to help me up, his voice trembling. "Katie, I didn't know." I pushed his hand away and staggered to my feet, wiping my mouth with my sleeve. I looked at him with bloodshot, exhausted eyes. My voice was a hoarse whisper, like wind whistling through a rotten door frame. "Who are you putting on this show for? Your kindness is more terrifying than a beating in prison." With that, I stumbled away, leaving Michael standing alone amidst the mess, surrounded by curious stares and the deafening silence of his own conscience. News that I was working at the company reached Michael's mother, Mrs. Caldwell, with astonishing speed, likely from Jessica or the office gossip. The sharp, formidable woman who had tormented me years ago stormed into the company the very next morning. She didn't go to the CEO's office. She marched straight down to the basement archive, ready for a fight. The door was thrown open with violent force. Mrs. Caldwell stood there clutching a designer handbag, a diamond-ringed finger pointing straight at my face. Her shrill voice echoed down the hall. "You little witch. You have the audacity to come back here and latch onto my son again? Haven't you ruined him enough? You jailbird. You bad omen. How long are you going to haunt my family?" I was holding a box cutter, preparing to tape up a carton. At the sound of her voice, my hand paused, but it didn't tremble. I looked up at her, the mother-in-law who had once forced me to scrub floors on my knees, who had kicked my bowl of rice onto the floor for the dog. I used to be terrified of her. But now, looking at her, I felt only a bitter, dark amusement. Seeing my silence, Mrs. Caldwell grew bolder. She lunged forward, raising her hand to slap me. "Are you deaf? Or are you trying to use that pathetic look to trick my son again? Get out of my sight." Her bejeweled hand swung toward me, but it stopped in midair. Her eyes widened in terror. Her face went ashen, and she stumbled backward, stammering. I had raised the box cutter, but I hadn't pointed it at her. I had pressed the sharp, cold blade against my own neck, right over the carotid artery that pulsed beneath my thin skin. I stared at her, my eyes wide and unblinking, as empty of emotion as a dead fish. I said nothing. I just slowly increased the pressure, and a thin line of red blood welled up and trickled down my neck, staining the collar of my white blouse. My action was not a threat. There was no hesitation. It was the calm readiness of someone willing to discard their life at any moment. For a person who was already dead inside, what was there to fear about physical death? You're insane, Mrs. Caldwell shrieked, her voice shaking with pure terror. She had never seen anyone act like this. Had never witnessed such mad desperation. She was afraid not that I would harm her, but that she would be forced to witness a death, that my blood would stain her reputation and her luxurious life. I took a step toward her, the blade still pressed to my throat, the blood still flowing. She scrambled backward, tripping over her own feet. Don't come near me, you psycho. I'm leaving right now. She turned and fled, forgetting all her usual poise, the sound of her stumbling heels echoing down the hallway. I stood there watching her disappear, then slowly lowered the box cutter. I wiped the blood from my neck. The stinging pain was a reminder that I was still alive. But this life, why was it so exhausting, so meaningless? At the end of the year, the company held a lavish gala at a 5-star hotel. Michael insisted I attend, claiming it was mandatory for all employees. That afternoon, a large gift box was delivered to the archive. Inside was a stunning evening gown of emerald green silk with a daring open back and sparkling beadwork. A short note from Michael was tucked inside, "Wear this tonight." I looked at the expensive dress, then down at my own rough, calloused hands, and felt a bitter irony. This dress was meant for a pampered socialite with flawless skin, not for a scarred ex-convict like me. But I knew I couldn't refuse Michael. I was just a puppet on his strings. In the cramped employee locker room, I changed out of my drab uniform. I stood before the mirror and looked at my naked body. I was painfully thin, my skin pale, but the worst part was my back. It was a horrifying tapestry of scars. They crisscrossed each other, thick, raised welts of different sizes and shapes. A map of my pain. Some were from the guards' stun batons, others from beatings with iron rods by fellow inmates. Some I had inflicted on myself during my delirious nightmares. They were grotesque centipedes crawling all over my skin, the permanent brand of my 6 years in hell. I trembled as I slipped on the gown. The cool silk sliding over my scarred skin made me shudder. The open back exposed all of my ugliness and ruin. Just as I was fumbling with the side zipper, the door to the locker room was pushed open. Michael walked in. "Are you ready?" "The car is," he stopped, his words catching in his throat as he saw my reflection in the mirror. He froze, his eyes widening, his pupils constricting in horror. He stared, transfixed, at the gnarled scars, the puckered, discolored skin on my back. He had never imagined that the body of the wife he had once held could be so ravaged. The raw truth, more brutal than any description in a medical file, hit him with the force of a physical blow. "Katie, you're back," he breathed, his voice a ragged, trembling whisper. He took an involuntary step forward, raising a shaking hand as if to touch the scars, to confirm if they were real or just a nightmare. The moment his fingertips brushed against my ruined skin, it was like an electric shock. The terrifying memories of the beatings flooded back. I let out a piercing scream, shoved his hand away, and scrambled into the corner, wrapping my arms around my head. "Don't hit me. Don't hit me anymore. I gave you the locket. I gave you everything. Please stop hitting me." I shrieked, tears streaming down my face as my body convulsed. In that moment, I didn't see Michael. I saw the snarling faces of the inmates, the iron rods swinging through the air. Michael stood paralyzed, his hands suspended in midair, empty and cold. He watched me cowering like a wounded animal, begging for its life. And his heart felt like it was being crushed into 1,000 pieces. "What have I done?" he thought. "What kind of hell did I put the woman I love through?" The warmly lit locker room suddenly felt colder and more desolate than a tomb. After my breakdown, I was still forced to go to the gala. Michael was afraid to leave me alone, terrified of what I might do. I hid behind a large pillar, the expensive open back gown feeling like a shroud wrapped around my broken body. The glittering chandeliers, the clinking of glasses, the hum of high society chatter, it all made me dizzy and sick. This world wasn't for me. I was a sewer rat dragged into the light, naked and filthy. Just as I was about to slip away to the restroom, a sharp voice called out, so familiar it sent an icy chill down my spine. "Well, look who it is." If it isn't Catherine, the woman who pushed me down and caused my miscarriage all those years ago. I turned. The woman before me wore a fiery red dress. Her makeup was perfect, and a diamond necklace sparkled at her throat. It was Emily. 6 years hadn't changed her, except to make her look sharper, more cunning. I heard she was now married to one of Michael's major business partners. Emily's eyes raked over me, lingering on my gaunt face and calloused hands before settling into a triumphant smirk. The smile of a winner looking down on her vanquished foe. I tried to walk away, but she blocked my path, cornering me against a wall. Under the cover of the loud music, she whispered in my ear, her breath thick with the smell of wine. "What's the matter? Surprised to see me, or are you just regretting those 6 wasted years in prison for nothing?" I lifted my head and met her gaze, my eyes hollow and empty. This seemed to amuse her even more. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. "Let me tell you a little secret. I was never pregnant. That pool of blood? It was a vial of theatrical blood I bought at a costume shop. Tucked it right inside my dress." My ears roared. The world went silent. Except for Emily's soft, cruel laughter echoing in my head. Theatrical blood. For a cheap prop, I had lost 6 years of my life. Lost my grandmother. Lost my very humanity. I stared at her beautiful face, now twisted with malice. It felt like a knife had been plunged into my chest, stealing the air from my lungs. I didn't lunge at her, didn't scream curses as she might have expected. My mind was filled with images of my solitary confinement, of the unjust beatings of my grandmother's lonely grave. The pain was too immense to direct outward. Instead, it turned inward. A blade pointed at my own heart. I felt disgusted. Disgusted by this world of lies, and disgusted by my own foolishness. I stumbled backward, bumping into the marble countertop of the restroom. The large mirror reflected my ghostly pale face. Seeing my strange reaction, Emily looked slightly unnerved and took a step back. Suddenly, I raised my hands and clawed at my own face, my own neck, my nails digging into my skin as if trying to tear away this defiled flesh. Blood welled up, mixing with the pale makeup. I felt no pain, only a kind of crazed release. She's insane," Emily screamed before fleeing the restroom. I didn't care. I slammed my head against the mirror. It shattered with a loud crack, sharp shards tearing into my forehead. Blood streamed down, turning my vision red. The restroom door was kicked open, and Michael rushed in. He froze at the sight of me, slumped on the floor amidst glass and blood. My face a mess, a shard of mirror in my hand, poised to slice my wrist. He ran to me, not caring about the broken glass piercing his shoes and hands. He wrapped his arms around me, his voice cracking with terror. "Katie, stop. What are you doing? Stop it." I thrashed in his arms. The strength of a madwoman made him struggle to hold me. I screamed, a gut-wrenching sound that was not human, but the cry of a dying animal. "I didn't kill anyone. I didn't push her. Give her back her baby. Just don't lock me in the dark again. Grandma, help me." Michael swept me into his arms and ran, ignoring the horrified stares of the gala guests. My blood soaked his white shirt, hot and metallic. In my delirium, I clutched at his shirt, my nails digging into his skin, my eyes rolling back in their sockets. Michael ran and wept, the powerful man's tears mingling with the blood on my face. Hearing my delirious words, he began to dimly realize that a horrifying truth had been buried for 6 long years. I woke up in a sterile white room that reeked of antiseptic. My arms and legs were strapped to the bed to prevent me from harming myself. A doctor stood nearby, shaking his head wearily as he spoke to Michael. "The patient is suffering from severe depression and acute psychosis. She exhibits strong self-destructive tendencies. The wounds on her body indicate this is not the first time." Michael leaned against the wall in the corner, his face looking 10 years older overnight. He looked at my still form on the bed, then turned as David entered with a file. David didn't dare meet his eyes. He placed the file on a table, his voice shaking. "Mr. Caldwell, as you instructed, I had our team investigate all of Miss Emily's medical records from 6 years ago. The results are what you suspected." Michael lunged for the file, ripping through the pages with trembling hands. The words, the official stamps, the witness statements, they all slowly came together, painting a picture of brutal truth. The doctor who had signed the miscarriage certificate was Emily's distant cousin, who had received a large sum of money to falsify the documents. The ultrasound image was also a fake, taken from another patient. It had all been a perfectly orchestrated play. There was no baby. There was no crime. There was only an innocent wife sent to prison by her own husband for 6 years to suffer untold torments. Michael dropped the file. The papers scattered across the floor like mournful white butterflies. He staggered backward and collapsed to his knees on the cold tile. What have I done? Oh God, what have I done? He clutched his head, his fingers tangling in his messy hair. He began to laugh, a wild, broken sound full of agony. He had personally destroyed the woman who loved him most in the world, all to protect a viper. My 6 years of youth, my grandmother's life, my honor and dignity, all of it buried by his own stupidity and blindness. In the quiet hospital room, the only sounds were the steady beep of the heart monitor and the choked sobs of a man being torn apart by his conscience. Michael looked up at me, his eyes filled with despair. He knew that even if he died 1,000 deaths, he could never wash away the sin, could never give me back the whole life he had stolen. Michael didn't immediately expose Emily to the law. He decided that prison or death was too easy an escape. He wanted her to feel the pain of losing everything piece by piece, just as she had done to me. A silent, ruthless campaign of retribution began, orchestrated by a man driven mad by regret. First, Michael targeted Emily's husband's company. Using his power and vast network, he systematically blocked their deals, cut off their funding, and leaked evidence of tax fraud, pushing the company to the brink of bankruptcy. Emily's husband, once a successful entrepreneur, was now drowning in debt and took his frustrations out on his wife. I heard from David that Emily was living in a constant state of fear, beaten by her husband and hunted by creditors. Her beauty faded, her arrogance gone. Next, Michael purged his own company. The employees who had taunted me in the cafeteria, the security guards who had snickered as I hauled heavy boxes, all were fired on the spot without severance. He acted with swift, merciless precision, as if punishing others could quell the storm raging inside him. He also tried to compensate me with material things. He transferred an enormous sum of money into my account, signed over several prime properties to my name, and bought me the most expensive supplements and medicines. He hired the best psychologist from abroad to treat me. He stayed by my bedside day and night, feeding me spoonfuls of broth, gently cleaning my hands. But to me, all of it was meaningless. I continued to exist like a ghost, going to the office out of habit, then sitting by the window at night, staring into the darkness. Money, houses, his belated care, nothing could stitch together my shattered soul. One afternoon, Michael entered my room and placed a glittering diamond jewelry box on the table. He knelt beside me and took my cold, bony hand. "Katie," he said, his voice, "I've dealt with them. Emily is paying for what she did. Do you feel any better?" I slowly turned my head, my empty eyes looking right through him into some distant void. A faint, bitter smile touched my lips. I pulled my hand from his. My voice was as light as a whisper. "Better? Whether she starves to death or gets beaten, will that bring back my 6 years? Will it bring my grandmother back to life? Are you getting revenge for me, Michael? Or are you just trying to salvage your own rotten conscience?" My question struck him dumb. He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. He understood that no matter what he did, the chasm between us, a chasm carved by blood, tears, and a human life, could never be bridged. That night, a sudden storm broke over the city. The rain fell in sheets and the wind howled around the villa. I was sitting on the windowsill, watching the raindrops trace paths down the cold glass. My heart a barren wasteland. Michael hadn't been home for days. David said he was busy handling the fallout at the company and dealing with Emily. I didn't care. He could turn the world upside down for all I cared. It had nothing to do with me anymore. Around midnight, the roar of a car engine broke the silence. The gates opened and Michael stumbled in, soaked to the bone and reeking of alcohol. He didn't turn on the lights, fumbling his way upstairs in the dark. When he opened my door, the dim light from my bedside lamp illuminated his flushed face and bloodshot eyes. He stood there staring at me, then suddenly collapsed to his knees, his body hitting the wooden floor with a loud thud. The proud, powerful man who commanded the business world was now kneeling before me, a broken mess. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking as racking sobs escaped his chest. "Katie, I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please hit me. Kill me. Just please don't look at me like that anymore." I sat motionless, making no move to help him. I watched him cry, watched him beat his own chest in self-flagellation. My heart was a block of ice. I felt no satisfaction, no pity for my former husband. The truth had come too late, so late it had lost all meaning. Michael looked up, his face a mess of tears. He crawled on his knees toward me, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, my gaze as sharp as a shard of glass. My voice was flat and devoid of emotion. What are you crying for? Are you pitying me, or are you crying for your own putrid conscience? He froze, stammering, I want to make it up to you. I'll spend the rest of my life atoning. I cut him off with a bitter laugh. Atone? You killed me, and now you're sorry? What if I took a knife and killed you right now, then knelt and apologized? Would you come back to life? Would you forgive me? My question was a sledgehammer blow that left him speechless. He stared at me, his mouth agape, unable to form a single word. He finally understood. This wasn't a lover's quarrel. This was the abyss between the living and the dead. Even though I was sitting here in flesh and blood, my soul, my love, had died 6 years ago on that fateful day in court. Michael collapsed onto the floor, his cries echoing in the large room. A sound more mournful and desolate than the storm raging outside. After that drunken night, Michael changed. He became more withdrawn at work, but around me he was timid and fearful. He brought home a thick file and threw it on the coffee table in front of his mother. It contained all the evidence of Emily's deception, including recordings of the fraudulent doctor's confession and damning financial records. Mrs. Caldwell's hands trembled as she read through it, her face turning from a healthy pink to a deathly white. She couldn't believe that the woman she had adored, the one she had wanted as a daughter-in-law, was such a venomous snake. More horrifying was the realization that her own prejudice and blindness had helped push her son's life into tragedy and my life into hell. The shock was too great. Mrs. Caldwell suffered a massive stroke, collapsing onto the sofa, the side of her face drooping as she tried to speak. An ambulance rushed her to the hospital. Michael called me, his voice weary and pleading. My mother had a stroke. She's in the ICU. Could you come see her for a minute? She's asking for you. I wanted to refuse, but thinking of the 5-year contract, I reluctantly agreed. When I walked into the intensive care unit, the smell of antiseptic was overwhelming. Mrs. Caldwell lay in the bed, hooked up to a web of tubes and wires, her face distorted by the stroke. When she saw me, a flicker of belated regret appeared in her eyes. She tried to move her one good arm, reaching it out toward me, her mouth working to form words that came out as garbled sounds. She wanted to take my hand, to apologize. I stood at the foot of the bed, watching that withered hand grasping at the air. I once yearned for that hand to comfort me, for her to call me her daughter. But that hand had only ever slapped me, had only ever pointed at me in condemnation. Now seeing it reach for me, I felt no sympathy, only a rising nausea. I took a step back, out of her reach. My gaze was as cold as if I were looking at a stranger on the street. You should rest, I said, my voice flat and cruel. Don't strain yourself. No one can understand what you're saying, and even if they could, it wouldn't change anything. Mrs. Caldwell's hand fell limp against the white sheet. A tear traced a path through the wrinkles on her face. She understood with agonizing clarity that my cold detachment was more painful than 1,000 curses. I no longer saw her as a mother or even as someone worthy of my hatred. I turned and walked out, leaving behind the steady rhythm of the machines and the silent, consuming remorse of a cruel woman. Michael's change in behavior, canceling appointments, neglecting wedding plans, and dedicating all his time to my recovery, drove Jessica insane. The pride of a pampered heiress was deeply wounded. She couldn't accept losing to a broken ex-convict. Afraid to confront Michael directly, she chose the most cowardly path. She came after me. I was working late one evening. The winter sun had set early, and the road from the bus stop to the villa was deserted. As I was walking, a motorcycle with 3 men on it suddenly swerved in front of me. They were large, heavily tattooed, and carrying iron pipes. Without a word, they descended on me like hungry wolves. Cripple her. Let's see how she seduces anyone, the leader yelled, swinging a pipe hard against my back. A blinding pain shot through me. But I didn't scream or beg for mercy. 6 years in prison, facing beatings far worse than this, had taught me one thing: if you don't fight back, you die. Survival instinct kicked in, overpowering my fear. I grabbed a broken brick from the sidewalk, my eyes turning wild and bloodshot like a cornered wolf's. When the second man lunged to grab my hair, I didn't retreat. I charged forward and smashed the brick into his head with all my strength. He howled in pain as blood gushed from the wound. The other 2 froze, stunned that a frail-looking woman could be so ferocious. I stood there trembling, the bloody brick held high, my eyes radiating a madness that said I was ready to die and take them with me. Come on, who wants to die next? I screamed, my voice a feral rasp. Just then, Michael's car screeched to a halt. He and David leaped out, horrified by the scene. Michael stared at me, disheveled, covered in dirt and blood, but standing defiant like a warrior at her last stand. The thugs saw them, realized Michael was not someone to be trifled with, and dragged their injured friend away. Michael ran toward me, but I brandished the brick, keeping him at a distance. "Stay back. Don't touch me," I yelled, tears finally breaking free. Michael stopped, his face a mask of anguish. He realized I was no longer the gentle Catherine he once knew. Life had turned me into a porcupine, ready to hurt anyone, including myself, to protect the fragile life I had left. It didn't take Michael long to trace the attack back to Jessica. It was the final straw. He would not tolerate anyone harming me ever again. The next morning, he called an emergency press conference. In front of hundreds of cameras, he stood at the podium, his face cold and resolute. He announced the unilateral cancellation of his engagement to Jessica, accepting all financial and reputational consequences. "I apologize to Miss Jessica's family for this sudden decision," he stated, "but I have realized my heart can only belong to my ex-wife. I made a terrible mistake in the past and allowed her to suffer unjustly. I intend to spend the rest of my life making amends and protecting her from any further harm." The announcement created a media firestorm. Some praised him as a romantic hero, while others called him a faithless cad. Michael didn't care. He was ready to take on the world to protect me. I watched him on the large television in the villa's living room. His words were so beautiful, so moving. The Catherine from 6 years ago would have wept with joy. But the Catherine of today felt nothing. I turned off the TV, plunging the room into silence. In my hands was a tattered old teddy bear, its stuffing poking out. It was the only gift Michael had ever given me. I had taken it to prison, held it during the cold nights, and used it to wipe away my tears. Now it was as broken and dirty as our love. I took a needle and thread and began to carefully stitch up the tears. Each stitch through the worn fabric felt like a stitch through my own heart. I wasn't fixing the bear to keep as a memento. I was mending the broken pieces of my memory so that I could then bury them forever. Whether Michael broke off his engagement or not, it couldn't change the fact that he and I now belonged to different worlds. Michael didn't give up. He clung to the stubborn belief that the embers of the past could reignite the love that had long since died. One evening, as the setting sun cast long, bloody shadows across the villa, he brought in an old wooden box. He placed it on the table in front of me, his movements full of reverence as if it contained priceless treasure. "Katie, look," he said, his eyes pleading and hopeful. "I found these in storage at the old house. The silver rings we bought at that street fair in college, the journal you kept when you were 20, and our first picture together from that trip to Vermont. I kept them all safe." I looked at the contents. The cheap silver rings now tarnished. The worn, leather-bound journal. The photo of 2 young, smiling faces radiant with happiness. These things were once my entire world. Proof of a love I thought was eternal. Now they were just a bitter mockery. They didn't evoke nostalgia, only a sharp reminder of my own blindness. The girl in that photo was dead. Killed the day the man beside her sent her to prison. I said nothing. I picked up the box, walked out to the patio, and went straight to a pile of dry leaves the gardener had swept up. I lit a match and tossed it in. As the flames leaped up, I threw the wooden box into the heart of the fire. "Katie, what are you doing?" Michael screamed, lunging forward, trying to pull the box from the fire. The flames caught the journal, and it erupted. He ignored the heat, plunging his bare hands into the inferno to retrieve the mementos. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, but he didn't seem to feel the pain. His face twisted in desperation. He managed to snatch the photo out, but it was half-charred. The girl's face had turned to ash, leaving only his own smiling face alone on a blackened background. I watched him, my eyes cold and empty, as he cradled his blistered hands, his face streaked with tears. He looked at me with reproach. I just said, "What are you saving? Why are you holding on to this garbage? Stop trying to find the old Catherine. She died the day you testified against her. The person standing in front of you now is just an empty shell with her name." My words were like a bucket of ice water, extinguishing the last flicker of hope within him. He sank to his knees beside the dying fire, clutching the burnt photograph to his chest, and began to sob like a lost child. With the irrefutable evidence Michael had gathered, Emily's day of reckoning finally came. She was indicted on multiple charges: fraud, forgery, and perjury. On the day of her arrest, Michael drove me past her luxury apartment building. He slowed the car and rolled down the window so I could see. Emily was being led out by 2 female officers. Her delicate hands, once accustomed to holding champagne flutes, now bound by cold steel handcuffs. Her hair was a mess, her face pale and haggard without makeup, and she wore only a rumpled bathrobe. She screamed and cursed, a pathetic attempt to cling to her last shred of dignity. A crowd of onlookers pointed and filmed with their phones, their contemptuous stares mirroring the ones I had endured 6 years ago. Michael glanced at me, searching for a sign of triumph or joy. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. "She's paying the price. Do you feel any relief?" I watched as Emily was shoved into the police van, the metal door slamming shut, imprisoning her in the same dark world I had just escaped. I thought I would be happy. I thought I would laugh in my enemy's face. But strangely, all I felt was a vast, cold emptiness. This revenge brought me no victory. It was just a belated end to a long, drawn-out tragedy. I leaned my head against the window, watching the light rain fall. Happy? Whether she's in prison or dead, my 6 years won't come back. The scars on my back won't disappear. My grandmother won't be resurrected to have one last meal with me. Do you think her imprisonment is a gift for me? No, it's just the punishment she deserves. It has nothing to do with my pain. Michael was silent, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He understood that while justice could be served, the wounds of the soul could never be healed by any court. That night, the storm returned with a vengeance. Thunder shook the villa to its foundations, and lightning split the sky. The violent noises awakened the monster of fear deep within my subconscious. Every flash of lightning was the blinding beam of a guard's flashlight in my eyes. Every clap of thunder was the slam of a solitary confinement door. No, don't lock me in. I didn't do anything wrong. Let me out. I screamed, scrambling around the room in a blind panic, crashing into furniture. Michael burst in and found me in the throes of a full-blown psychotic episode. He rushed to hold me. "Katie, calm down. It's me, Michael. You're home." But I didn't recognize him. In my delirium, he was a cruel prison guard. I fought him wildly, scratching and clawing. As he tried to hold me tighter to soothe me, I bit down hard on his shoulder. My teeth sank deep into his flesh, and the metallic taste of blood sent me into a greater frenzy. Michael cried out in pain, but didn't let go. He gritted his teeth, stroking my hair and whispering apologies. I bit him until I was exhausted and went limp in his arms, my tears soaking his shirt as I mumbled for my mother, for my grandmother. But not once did I call his name. Michael held me, his heart being sliced to ribbons. He realized that in my world he wasn't my husband or my savior. He was my nightmare. He held me all night, the blood from his wound drying on his clothes, a living statue of eternal regret. The next morning, the storm had passed. I woke up in my own bed. Michael was asleep in a chair beside me, his shirt stained with dried blood. The memory of the night flooded back. I looked at the wound on his shoulder without a shred of pity, only a bone-deep weariness. I knew that if I stayed here, we would both slowly perish in this private hell. When he woke, I looked him straight in the eye. "Michael," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Let me go." He started to protest, but the look in my eyes silenced him. "Why are you keeping me here? To watch me go insane every night? To torture yourself? You want to make amends? The only way is to let me disappear from your life. Don't look for me. Let's pretend the old Catherine really did die. Just let me go find a quiet place to bury what's left of me." He bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. He knew I was right. Keeping me here was selfish, an attempt to soothe his own conscience, not for my happiness. After a long moment, he looked up, his eyes red. "All right," he whispered, his voice broken. "I'll let you go." He went to his safe and returned with a bank card and a savings passbook. "But you have to promise me you'll take this. It's not charity. It's the money from the sale of your grandmother's land. Take it. So I know you won't starve somewhere. If you don't take it, I won't let you leave." I wanted to refuse, but his desperate, pleading eyes made me relent. I would need money to get far away. "Fine," I said coolly. "I'll take it. Thank you." It was the price he owed for my 6 years in hell. For the first time in years, I went into the kitchen and tied on an apron. I cooked a simple meal, the kind of food we used to eat when we were poor and happy: fried eggs, sautéed greens, and rice. The familiar sounds and smells filled the cold house. When Michael came home, he froze, staring at the hot meal on the table as if it were a mirage. "Sit down and eat," I said softly. He sat, his hands shaking as he picked up his fork. He took a bite of egg, and tears streamed down his face, splashing into his rice. He ate ravenously, sobbing as if it were the most delicious meal of his life. "It's just like it used to be," he choked out. You've forgiven me, haven't you? I didn't answer. I just put another piece of meat on his plate. I had dissolved a mild sleeping pill in his soup, enough to give him a long, dreamless sleep. Eat up, Michael, I thought. You'll need your strength to face the loneliness that's coming. After he finished, he slumped over the table, fast asleep with a contented smile on his face. I helped him to bed and tucked him in. I stood there for a long moment, looking at his face, which had aged so much. Then I went to my room and packed my single canvas bag. I left behind all the expensive clothes and jewelry, taking only a few old outfits, the stitched-up teddy bear, and the bank card. On the dresser, I left the keys and a note. Thank you for the meal. We're even now. Goodbye. I slipped out of the house and into the silent night, leaving my entire painful past behind me. When Michael woke the next morning, the sun was streaming in. The memory of our dinner brought a smile to his face. He jumped out of bed and ran to my room. Katie, time for breakfast. But the room was empty. The bed neatly made and cold. On the dresser, he saw the keys and the note. 2 words stared up at him. A final, brutal judgment. Goodbye. No, Katie, he roared, crumbling the note in his fist. He searched the house, the grounds, but I was gone. This time I was smarter. I didn't take a bus or a train that could be tracked. I walked to a highway and hitched a ride with a long-haul trucker heading south. I threw away my phone, severing my last tie to my old life. Michael searched frantically, hiring the best private investigators, offering his entire fortune as a reward. But I had vanished, using all the survival skills of a person who had once been pushed to the absolute edge. The villa became a tomb. Michael neglected his company and locked himself in my room, drinking himself into a stupor, screaming my name into the emptiness. He finally understood the price of his cruelty, eternal loneliness. After 3 days on the road, I arrived in a small town nestled deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. The air was clean and cool. I rented a tiny wooden cabin in the middle of a sprawling coffee farm and started a new life under the name Grace. I worked as a farmhand, a grueling job from dawn till dusk. My hands grew rougher, but I found peace in the physical labor. Here, no one knew my past. The simple, kind locals judged me only by the amount of coffee I could pick. One day, I found an abandoned puppy by the side of the road. I took him home and named him Freedom. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without nightmares. The pain was still there, a scar that ached when the weather changed, but it no longer bled. I was learning to live with it. 2 years passed. Michael had pulled himself together and thrown himself into his work, making his company more successful than ever. But he was a changed man, cold, somber, a permanent sadness in his eyes. He never dated, living alone in the vast, empty villa. He used most of his personal fortune to create a legal aid foundation for wrongly convicted women. It was his silent penance. His mother, Mrs. Caldwell, survived her stroke, but was left paralyzed and unable to speak. Michael cared for her physical needs meticulously, but shrouded her in a chilling silence. For 2 years, he never spoke a word to her beyond curt inquiries about her health. His silence was her life sentence, a daily torment of regret for the family she had shattered. My peaceful life continued, quiet as the clouds over the mountains. I thought I had truly escaped until one fateful day. David was on a business trip, scouting potential coffee suppliers. He was wandering through the local farmer's market when he passed by me. I was wearing old work clothes, a bandana covering much of my sun-weathered face, selling some foraged mushrooms. He glanced at me, then stopped. Something about my posture, or perhaps the scarred, bony hands arranging the mushrooms, caught his eye. He backed away into a corner, pulled out his phone, zoomed in, and snapped a picture. He sent it immediately. Hundreds of miles away, Michael was in his office when his phone buzzed. He opened the message, and his world stopped. He stared at the image, his hand shaking so violently he almost dropped the phone. It was me, older, weathered, but unmistakably me. Tears streamed down his face. He canceled everything, ran from his office, and drove through the night like a man possessed. He arrived in my town at dusk and left his car at the bottom of the hill, walking up the muddy path to my cabin. He hid behind a large oak tree and watched. I was on my porch, mending a shirt. Freedom slept at my feet. A little neighbor girl, no older than 3, ran up, calling me Mama Grace and jumping into my lap. I put down my sewing, tickled her, and she giggled. And then I smiled. A genuine, radiant smile that lit up my entire face. It was the smile Michael hadn't seen in 8 years. The smile he thought he had destroyed forever. He stood frozen in the darkness, his heart aching. He saw the peace I had found, a simple, profound peace that all his money and power could never buy. He realized I had come back to life, not because of his amends, but by getting away from him. He wanted to run to me, to hold me, to tell me he missed me to the point of madness, but his feet were rooted to the ground. He was afraid. He was afraid that his presence would extinguish that smile, replacing it with the old familiar terror. He was the storm, and I could only find peace in its absence. He stood there all night, the cold dew soaking his clothes. Just before dawn, he knew he had to leave. He took a potted wild orchid he had bought at the market and quietly placed it on my doorstep. He looked at the closed door one last time. "Be well, Katie," he whispered to the wind, his voice breaking. He turned and walked away, not daring to look back, afraid his courage would fail him. When I opened my door that morning, the first thing I saw was the orchid, its vibrant purple blossoms trembling in the morning breeze. I looked around. The road was empty. But then I saw them. Deep footprints in the damp earth. The footprints of a man's expensive dress shoes. My heart skipped a beat. I knew who had been here. Only he knew I loved this flower. Only he would stand outside all night, too afraid to knock. Michael. He had found me. An old fear gripped me. My first instinct was to run again, but then I stopped. I looked at the orchid, then at the footprints leading away down the hill. He had come. He had seen me, and he had chosen to leave, to grant me the peace I so desperately craved. It meant he finally understood. He had finally let go. A great weight lifted from my soul. I didn't chase after him. I felt no anger. I bent down and picked up the orchid. I brought it inside and placed it on the windowsill in the sunlight. The past was finally in the past. I didn't forgive Michael. Some wounds can never be erased. But I no longer carried the burden of hate. I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the clouds drift over the mountaintops. Life, like tea, is often bitter at first, but can leave a sweet aftertaste. I smiled. A quiet, peaceful smile. Somewhere far away, Michael was driving back to his world, and I was staying in mine, free and at peace at last. What do you think? Was Michael's final act of letting me go true atonement, or just another desperate attempt to ease his own guilt? I really want to hear your thoughts.